Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Wednesday, February 13th, 2019. Be aware, Valentine's Day tomorrow. I don't know if that means anything to any of you. You have to go buy some overpriced cards, maybe some flowers or something like that. I don't know. I thought I'd put you all on notice that was the case. It's been a while since I have bought a Valentine's Day card. I should probably, every year though, it's beginning to become a habit. My wife says, don't bother. It's a ridiculous tradition, and it's okay if we do something else for Valentine's Day. But the cards, and I'm beginning to agree. I actually was in the store yesterday, not the freestanding card store, and I can't believe there still are such things. I'm glad, and not everything should be eliminated in favor of ordering them over Amazon.com, and you got to be able to pick those things up at the last minute. But it's been increasingly in the last couple of years. I noticed. I was thinking about this morning as I was pondering whether or not it was a good idea to continue with the tradition of skipping the cards. I don't know. I feel funny about doing that. But as I spend more time in that section, the Valentine's Day section, and I realized that, I usually only like those somewhat humorous, like shoebox style cards typically anyway. Not the sappy over-the-top stuff, but even the shoebox stuff is getting to be over-the-top in its own way. Have you noticed this? I don't know. I feel like Andy Rooney here, but it seems like every card is like, well, it's just a clever way of getting across the, hey, why don't you take off all your clothes and let's have sex? It's like, well, that's not very Valentine's Day-ish, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that was the point of Valentine's Day, and we've been hiding it all along. But this whole section of cards that are like clever sex jokes, like, okay. I mean, I can do those myself, I suppose. I just can't draw the cartoon. All right, so I'll give in anyway. I think I'll get something nice, a box of chocolates shaped like a heart. They should make one that's actually shaped like a real heart. That would, I don't know. Do you think that would get people off of the chocolate? It's probably good for your diet if you don't. But all right. Well, anyway, that's tomorrow. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, I'm sure. Today is Wednesday. Greg Dworkin already preparing his raft of stories. Joan McCarter will not be with us today. She is taking the week off. And so I think we missed her last week, so that's too bad. So, we're hurting here, but we'll catch up on what's happening in and around Congress regardless. The situation as it now stands, it being Wednesday and the end of the temporary funding agreement coming up on Friday at midnight. There is a deal in place, and the only question now is whether or not Presidents Ann Coulter and possibly Sean Hannity can talk the other guy who claims to be president, Donald Trump, out of signing this thing. Sean Hannity, I think, threw the towel in last night, and I did see that he was saying, yeah, go ahead and sign the thing. Coulter, I think, has criticized it, but I guess not enough so far that it has panicked Trump. Let's see, I've got a report here from The Hill that I grabbed. That is this about the shutdown, or is it something else? I can't even tell. All right, let's see. Yep, here comes Greg. He'll tell us what it's all about. I guess we got to get an early start today. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. Okay.
We had an ice storm last night, so
okay.
I'm going to have to actually abbreviate this. Certainly we'll go through 9:30, maybe a little bit after that, but I got to give myself extra road on the ice skating rink in order to get to work.
Okay. All right. Well, ice usually preserves things and makes them last longer. This is backwards.
Yeah. I could see the woolly mammoth in the backyard and all that, but, what I'm worried about is that it's now over 32 degrees, and I'm worried the thing might melt and,
Okay.
Might chase the car and stuff like that.
Well, that'll get you to the office quicker.
I watched Abby. I watched the dog skate down the driveway, and actually was quite worried about her because she only knows one speed, which is fast, and that doesn't work on ice.
Yeah, no, not so great. Okay,
At least not without dog skates.
Oh, you should try that. Could a
I
dog
should.
do a quadruple axle, you think?
Well, she did one, and
Yeah? It's got 4
wasn't planning
feet,
on
so
it, but she's
you don't
fine.
have
She
to-
didn't get hurt, but
Okay, you only have to
she
try
was
twice.
she was rather surprised by herself.
Well, all right. So
Maybe even rather pleased. It's hard to tell from a dog.
you might want to take up the skating.
So today's pundit roundup
Yes.
was titled "On Shutdowns, Caving, and Presidential Candidates," and that's what our segment will be. I started out by saying the story isn't whether Trump is unhappy or whether he'll sign the spending deal. It's that he was defeated.
Yes, and that appears to be the case. Well summarized by Chris Hayes the other night, apparently.
Yeah, he had a lovely, not always useful for radio, summary of that.
Yes. But yeah, the truth is he's talked himself down from $25 billion for the wall to $1.3 billion for maybe a fence or something like that.
And he will sign it, and he won't declare a national emergency. He will
all right,
divert
good.
funds from elsewhere. The question is, does he take it away from California and Puerto Rican disaster relief or from anywhere else where it's actually needed?
Little
And
old
who gets
ladies.
mad at him for that?
Little
The same
old
people
ladies.
that'll get mad when they don't get the tax returns they were expecting. But let's just summarize the major papers and how they handled it. New York
All right.
Times, for example, they were nice to Trump. They're always nice to Trump.
Sure.
5 key takeaways from the tentative deal on border security. Republicans are sending the president a message. We are not going to vote with you to preserve the shutdown. If you try to do that, we will override it, is what they're telling him. Trump has a messaging challenge because, it fell in his lap. More on that from Matt Glassman, who I thought had a kind of a brilliant exegesis, really looking at what was going on there. The president still has a card in his pocket, a national emergency, but he can't play it because nobody wants it.
All right.
Congress showed it could function normally.
When?
When Republicans and Democrats, when Shelby and Leahy got into a room and worked out a deal.
Oh, all right. So, okay. So far, so good. A deal was made.
That's what passes for normal. That's, as John McCain used to say, regular order.
Sort of, yeah. I guess that works. Okay.
Right? And finally, in principle, doesn't mean the deal is final. However,
Okay.
Robert Costa does tweet this morning. A White House official told the Post this morning that President Trump sees signing the border deal, if passed by Congress, as the way to avoid another shutdown, but he would also likely pursue an executive order to reallocate federal funds to barrier projects. Which is exactly what we're saying. That's not the same thing as a national emergency and all the brilliant Trumpians who were explaining to you that when he caved to Nancy Pelosi over the State of the Union speech showdown, he really won, even though it looked like he lost, because in the end he would declare a national emergency and take over, are kind of backpedaling. And that's part of why Sean Hannity said, no, of course, yes.
All right. So it's interesting. So he sees signing it as the way to avoid a shutdown. Well, that's good eyesight because that is
Let's
the way
get
you.
to it in a minute. But Aaron Blake also points out Trump's failed shutdown strategy
Yes.
produced
All of
an
it.
even worse deal than he started with.
By far.
The fact that Republicans signed off shows how little leverage they have. It's all rather transparently geared toward saving face at this point.
Yes, that seems true.
True, absolutely. Rather than winning the debate, assuming Republicans can't get anything more out of this deal than they have right now, it will be quite the capitulation. Trump could have had taken $100.6 billion and/or declared a national emergency last year before all this went down. He will have gotten basically nothing for shutting down the government for 35 days, and he might just have to take it. Well, he will have to take it. But a couple of points here. First of all, again, the role of shame in anybody except Trump is quite important.
Okay.
Republicans don't want to be shamed by the fact that they lost. Trump doesn't care. He just declares he won.
Right.
That's his defense. It works when you're a total narcissist, but it doesn't work for like real life people. So they have to have some face-saving way to do this. Saving face is important. People on our side of the political divide get really mad when we give anything to them. Not a penny for the wall. Sometimes you got to give $500,000 for what isn't really a wall because they need that face saving in order to get that deal done. And there's always going to be people on our side who grumble about it. I say, so what? Too bad. That's not how it works.
Okay.
Right? Sometimes you just have to give them a tiny little bit, a little fig leaf. Everybody knows they lost. and they still are in the White House and they still control the Senate. So, like, don't go nuts about this.
All right, I see.
Right? So Matt Glassman says, so what really went on here? One thing, he says, the White House won with the 3-week continuing resolution is some ability to publicly distance themselves from the final deal. And that's a lot different than how the previous shutdown strategy worked out. In other words, this one was done by McConnell, not Jared Kushner.
Okay.
During the
White
shutdown,
House got that.
McConnell skillfully maneuvered the politics into a White House and Democrats must make a deal, making himself absent from public negotiations. Refusing to hold votes in the Senate, repeatedly saying it's a negotiation between Trump and Dems. To a large degree at work, Republicans are never going to escape blame. Blame always goes to those trying to leverage a shutdown. But the bulk of the blame fell on Trump, not congressional Republicans. And then he has polling data to support that. And in fact, it's pretty stark. I mean, less than 10% blamed Republicans. And like 50% or more blamed Trump. 30% blaming Democrats. So it was Trump versus Democrats, and that was McConnell's doing. And McConnell was also able to once again use an agenda-setting technique, otherwise known as process, to shield his members from the wrath of the conservative base.
Yeah.
So with the 3-week continuing resolution, the White House and Trump was able to arrange bargaining publicly as a deal between Democrats and congressional GOP. So regardless of the nature of the private negotiations, the public face was this. The deal was going to be negotiated in Congress. So it shifted from Trump negotiating with Democrats to Congress negotiating with itself.
Okay.
What does that win for Trump? Not a whole lot. It's still going to be a weak face-saving deal that's mostly embarrassing to him. Not that he can be embarrassed, given that he could have gotten something better a year ago. But it does give him flexibility in reaction. Instead of having to go out and sell a weak deal that he crafted, he now has the option of begrudgingly accepting somebody else's deal, which he hates.
I see. Okay.
Blame. Not a great look, but it beats having to own an embarrassing face-saver deal that he negotiated. Glassman says, now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Trump will go out and try to sell the deal as a remarkable win when he'll try to take big credit for it. But my guess is that once the White House knew they were never getting anything but a bad face-saver, and that's why I keep saying he lost, no matter how much you think you should have gotten more out of, they wanted to maneuver the public negotiations to minimize the president's role, leaving him the option of signing it but not having to love it. And the White House gets to take positions like, well, I haven't decided whether we're going to sign it or not.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if the White House judges the politics of the deal are really bad, he could always veto it. That's not likely, but possible. And if none of it's great for Trump, he looks super weak, totally out of the loop, and nothing like a great deal maker. He would have looked weaker and less like a deal maker if he were viewed as having negotiated and constructed the deal himself.
I suppose that's possible.
So that's his view. And I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
I think it covers what Mitch McConnell was doing, which was try to protect his members. And, there's another thing about the dynamic there. And I'm just going to throw in this Rick Wilson tweet on a completely different subject, the Green New Deal. And Rick Wilson writes, you know why Pelosi didn't take the bait and go all Green New Deal all the time? Because she knows Mitch McConnell's across the street. Don't hand a smart opponent a weapon with which to cut off your head. So Pelosi is no fool. She said no, not a dime for the wall, but she knows there's going to be some money for border security, because in a Congress where the Republicans control the Senate, there has to be.
Yes.
There has to be some. It's not going to be zero. It's going to be a tiny amount. And we talked on Monday about the meaning of the bed cap for ICE.
Right.
Just to recap, it really doesn't matter what the number is. They'll do whatever they want. But the idea was the Democrats wanted to go on record as objecting to the idea, which is a Stephen Miller idea, that you find any undocumented immigrants, you get to throw them in jail and deport them, no matter what they did.
Right.
Maybe they made a left turn on a red light or something. That's a crime. Throw them in this detention bed and deport them. Treat them equally as somebody who robbed the bank, for the sake of argument.
Yes, all right.
The Democrats said, no, you got to prioritize that. There's way too many undocumented immigrants. You can't lock them all up, even though you want to. We oppose that in principle. And in practice, we want to go back to prioritizing those who commit heinous crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And to Stephen Miller and the white supremacists in the White House, the anti-immigrationists, that's totally unacceptable. So they said, no cap whatsoever. We will not budge on this. You have to give us all the beds we asked for and more. And the Democrats said, we were going to give you less beds because we want to tie your hands a little bit because we don't want you to think that you can do whatever the heck you want. So that's what that fight was about. And it turned out the Democrats won that one, too, in the sense that there actually is a lowering of the cap. Not as much as the Democrats wanted. But the fact that it was lowered at all tells us that the Republicans had no leverage here. And the Republican Senate was not going to back up Stephen Miller's dream of indefinite detention to everybody. Mm-hmm. That messages. So it's a win, even though there's going to be money for border security. Yeah, and maybe Trump can turn that into 55 miles of fencing.
Yes, possibly. If he is super lucky.
It's still a win. It's not that, okay, Pelosi caved. The one that caved was Trump, and it's pretty clear to everybody that that's in fact what happened. Everything else is space-saving. So that's what's going on with all of these negotiations, and that's why, regardless of what Hannity said on day one, by day three, Hannity was saying, okay, it's not that bad a deal.
All right.
But no other deal would be better, and a lot of other deals would be worse for them. This is as good as they could get. They cannot get anything better than this. And if they keep negotiating the way things are going, the more they prolong it, the more they get blamed, and the worse deal they get. So you got to stop at some point and saying, okay, maybe we should stop digging.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would make a certain amount of sense for them. We'll see whether that's what they come away with. I guess, I mean, if it works for McConnell, I guess, then I guess he'll be pretty pleased with it, too. I mean, in the end, what we find out is that the leverage to get this deal passed and signed is that if it isn't signed, if it's vetoed, Congress will vote to override the veto, which is something they could have done last time. I mean, ultimately, I know he thinks he shirked it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they say they weren't, but 35 days of shutdown is plenty to get you ready. But, I mean, and the flip side of all this engineering is, don't forget that McConnell prevented them from doing, during that longest shutdown in American history, what they say they would do now if things didn't work out. They could have done it then. They were afraid. He protected them from it. That's his role. But let's not forget that that's exactly how he engineered it. This thing has to go on for long enough so that we realize that if there's a second round of it, we have to end it. You should have ended it the first time. You just didn't want to look. You didn't want to look bad. So instead, you look bad.
If there's a second round, then without question, McConnell and the Republicans would get blamed for it.
Yes.
He knows that, and he wants to avoid that. So that's why there's a lot of impetus on his part.
No, it'll work.
To make sure that
doesn't
Trump
make
actually
logical
signs it. And
sense.
so that it'll happen the way it's laid out.
Yeah. And that doesn't have to make logical sense. It just has to make media sense. The media doesn't have time to go back and point out that all of this could have been done last time. It's already days later. It's old news. Forget about it. So we won't have that pointed out for us anytime soon, and it'll probably work. And okay, that's just one of the prerogatives.
And I go back to a point that I made before about being shameless.
Yes.
It does no good to bring up old tweets that Trump said, old tweets that Hannity said, or old tweets that Coulter said.
Sure.
Because they have no shame. It doesn't matter. They don't care.
Yeah.
It's tomorrow's show. They want you to listen to tomorrow's show. They don't care if you didn't listen to last week's show. That's over.
Mm-hmm. That's true. No shame about that. There's always a tweet, and there's always no shame.
Right. So being shameless is a distinct, weaponized advantage that our side simply doesn't have, just like not using logic. Right? And lying, those are things that they can do that we can't. So it's an asymmetric playing field, my friends.
Yes. All right.
Speaking of asymmetry.
Okay.
Here's an interesting piece from Morning Consult, and then maybe we'll get into Virginia a little bit. New Morning Consult political testing how partisanship affects voters' reaction to politician scandals, and found, drumroll, an asymmetric response.
Oh, Ta-da!
Republican voters were significantly more likely than Democrats to back a member of their own party involved in a scandal.
Wow.
See Al Franken versus Steve King. Share of voters who said they would vote for a politician either generally or from their own party with the following indiscretion. Worn blackface. If you use, ask Democrat voters, would you vote for a Democrat politician versus a generic politician? It was basically the same. No.
Okay.
Okay. But among Republican voters, if a generic politician wore blackface, would you support them? 27%. But if a Republican did that, 39%. There was no difference on the Democratic side. Each was about 15% support, whether it was a named Democrat or named as a Democrat or just generic politician. Republicans were 12% more likely to support that person if it turned out they were a Republican that did it.
Well,
so the old "it's okay if you're a Republican" stuff is true.
It's worth a couple of points.
Yeah, 12 or so.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Accused of sexual misconduct. Among Democratic voters, only 10% would support, and it doesn't matter whether you say Democrat, politician, they don't care. Among Republican voters, if you said that a politician, a generic politician, was accused of sexual misconduct, 20% still support them. But if you told Republicans that it was a Republican who was accused of this, then that shoots up to 31%. So every time you say it's not just the generic politician who did this deed, cheating on their spouse or whatever, accused of sexual misconduct, wear blackface, if you tell Republicans that it was a Republican that did this, then they're 10 to 12% more likely to support that person, whereas there's virtually no difference on the Democratic side.
Well, that explains a lot, and why Democrats consistently, well, not consistently, but very frequently resign in the face of things like that, and
Republicans don't. No. That is correct. Now, it's interesting that Ralph Northam is taking the "I'm not resigning" stuff.
Yes. And,
of course, Virginia's complicated. And any way you look at it, it's complicated. You could say, okay, well, Ralph Northam, did something that doesn't allow him to lead. But then, if you look deeply, you'll find just about every Virginia politician in that setting. Yeah. And, of course, Republicans won't care about the Republicans. And the bottom line there is if you push it to its logical conclusion, you'll wind up with Republican control of Virginia governorship, and Democrats don't want that. So they're torn about what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit in this particular instance, one of my first thoughts, beside, the chief thought was, oh my God, I can't believe we have to deal with this. But there was a part of me that thought, as bad as this is, I am so annoyed that every time something like this happens with Republicans, they just ride it out, and Democrats do the right thing and step down and get out of the way. And I wish it wasn't this issue, because at some point I would like to see Democrats say no more of this game. Not on this particular one, though. Okay,
so Fairfax came up with a different issue.
Yes.
Did you feel any better?
Right. No, I didn't. And I said, this also sucks. And now I'm really annoyed because we have two of them got to go. And then, but at least there won't happen a third time. And then, of course, there was a third one. And then I said, all right, now at this point, I'm starting to think maybe this game has to end. Maybe we stop resigning in the face of everything. I don't know. And it's a tough argument to make, because, of course, it's very appealing to hear, we're even-handed. We do the same thing with everyone. That's a good position to take. You want to be there. But for how long? We keep losing and losing and losing on these issues.
Well, again, it's because the Democratic base prefers people to get out if you do stuff, and the Republican base, if it's a Republican, it's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
that's
what the
data says. It's not just my opinion. That's what the data says.
Yeah, well, it's true, and it's true because I'm here. I am sitting here getting annoyed and upset about it, whereas a Republican is 12% more likely to say, who cares?
Well, there's a couple of things that play into it, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have more shame than they do.
Yes, that's one. Yeah.
Number two is we're into it for the principle, and they're into it for the power.
Yes, it doesn't pay anymore, though.
So if you resign, you lose your power.
Yeah.
And so they don't want to do that. They say, well, that's ridiculous. You're asking me to give up power. I'm not going to do that. Even though we lost the election, let's pass a whole bunch of lame duck stuff to make sure that the next people have a less chance of keeping power so we can get it the next time. I mean, everything they do is oriented that way. It's not mean to say that. It's factual.
Yes. It doesn't make me feel any better for having to resign. But,
so Northam hasn't resigned.
Yes. So
Fairfax hasn't resigned. And apparently the Attorney General of Massachusetts says they'll look into the Boston allegation. One of the sexual misconduct allegations took place in Boston.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
And so they're willing to look at it. And then the other one, I guess, was in college. And perhaps that in North Carolina, and that could be looked at too. So that may be how the Fairfax thing winds up. People saying, let's not rush to judgment. The white Virginia delegate who was going to bring up impeachment charges decided it didn't look good for a white politician to be pushing the black guy out.
I could see that.
So he's dropped that. And it looks like, at least on that one, there will be calls. I think there's probably a consensus reaching that the best thing to do is investigate it.
Yes.
And then decide.
Okay.
So that's probably where the Fairfax thing is going. That doesn't save him, but it delays things. And it's unclear what happens with Northam and Herring. Again, my guess, I told you the last time I was on the show or last week, Northam stays for now, and Herring definitely stays. And we'll see with Fairfax.
Yeah, well, now we have to wait and see how it plays out. And you say it was complicated. It absolutely was. It's very difficult to watch it happen, watch it develop, not want to jump in immediately and solve it. I mean, you kind of want it to go away, but, well, things are tough. Okay.
Eric Wrighton's in Missouri doesn't tell you what happens next.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. No skates on yet, Greg?
Not yet.
Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about presidential politics here. That is to say, there's a 2020 election, and it's never too early to start. I think it started the day after the last election.
Yeah.
But Ariel Edwards-Levy has a post, and this is right in my pundit roundup, right at the top. Net favorability rating among Democrats via a new CNN poll, and I'll just put that over on our Skype list so you could find it easy.
I got it. Okay.
Kamala Harris has a plus 48. She's at 60% favorable.
Okay.
Plus
Even
48.
Though something rap. Okay.
Right. Warren is at plus 46.
Mm-hmm.
Castro is at plus 20.
Oh, wow.
Abby.
Castro fan. All right. Well, is there an ice skater at your door?
Well, what happens? It may be.
Yeah.
Hang on, I got to go see.
I guess we'll find out. All right. Well, we'll check into it, and we'll all sort of see if we can figure out who is at the door. What's the name?
It might. We have Buttigieg at plus 6.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. We have Tulsi Gabbard at plus 2.
Really?
Can you hear?
I can. She's saying all of that. I disagree also, Abby. I know. I don't understand how she could be plus 2.
And Schultz is a minus 17.
That I believe. Why is he on this list? This is Dems.
Because whatever, you got to stick him somewhere. So even as an independent, he might be there.
Put him as
and there's two pieces I want to mention about that. Brendan Nyhan has a nice piece in Medium A politician's authenticity doesn't matter. Who cares how Kirsten Gillibrand ate her fried chicken?
Oh, that I understand.
Right?
That part. Okay.
Frank Rich said on Twitter, is there anything Gillibrand has done that is not contrived and opportunistic? I asked the question seriously, replies, welcome. And Frank Bruni went further, writing that you got the sense she would have grabbed the chicken with her pinky toe if she'd been told to, anything to conform, anything to please. And that's just the latest entry in the growing pantheon of political food gaffes. Right? You know, the Swiss cheese and your Philadelphia.
Food gaffes.
You covered that the other day. Mm-hmm. People do have Swiss cheese on the menu, as Adrios pointed out.
Yes.
But with most candidates' speeches and rallies generating relatively few headline-worthy sound bites, reporters and commentators often instead turn their focus to theater critic-style assessments of a candidate's strategy and campaign skills. And in its most dangerous form, this form of coverage centers on manufactured narratives about a candidate's personality. You know, Hillary being unlikable.
Yes. What about Frank Bruni being unlikable?
How about Frank Rich being an ex-theater critic? I mean, you know.
I can't. I don't know with these guys. The New York Times columnists are driving me up the wall lately. Okay.
Right.
No
In
surprise.
the end, Brendan Nyhan says, you know what? None of this matters. It really doesn't matter.
I hope not.
So if you, again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but again, if you're looking at the people who have declared, not the people who haven't.
Yeah.
Harris had a great rollout. Warren had a pretty good one. But definitely you're still going to have to deal with the whole DNA ancestry thing. Castro and Gillibrand were just okay. Their rollouts didn't really move the dial. And you can look at people who have been successful, have gotten themselves on TV, or doing the rounds of discussion and so on and so forth, and doing well with it.
Okay.
And those who are still having trouble breaking through. And I look at our own Daily Kos every other week straw poll. Harris is a strong candidate. I mean, and Warren is not too far behind, and that's how things are going at the moment.
Okay, that's seems reasonable. The Gillibrand one has got me annoyed. Not that I'm a big Kirsten Gillibrand fan one way or another. I just find that one so hard to me, fried chicken is a borderline one. I mean, looking at it substantively, you know, I mean, it's
it wasn't
a messy
just fried
thing.
chicken. It was chicken with waffles.
Yeah. Well, right. So, I mean, so
do you
started
eat
out
waffles with your hands?
I do now. I'm afraid not to. Frank Rich might write
Well, what do you do with the
nasty
maple
about
syrup? How long does it take to lick off your fingers?
Wipe it on Frank Rich's jacket.
I mean, those waffles are finger licking good, you know?
That's right. And he should. I'll make Frank Bruni lick my fingers.
So let's do the bottom guy on the list, just because I guess he had a CNN town hall that everybody's panning because it's fun.
That guy sucks.
Howard Schultz's presidential campaign, Ezra Klein writes, is based on 3 ideas, and they're all wrong.
First, an explainer. What is an idea? All right.
What's 3? Running as a third-party candidate in a first-past-the-post election system is likelier to reinforce the two-party duopoly and the dangers of third parties than to open America to multi-party democracy. So that's mistake number 1.
Yes.
Mistake number 2, governing as a centrist independent free of party would generate gridlock and conflict in a system that's organized around political parties. We were just talking about how the shutdown comes and goes. Schultz has no theory of Congress or legislating that makes sense. He just has a theory of himself.
True.
And then thirdly, taking the billionaire's express lane into presidential politics just a few years after Donald Trump did the same thing would be further proof to Americans they live in an unrepresentative oligarchy. So if those are the theories of the case, so to speak, as to why he's running, he's a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, okay. That Ezra's not wrong. It's just...
Right.
I know.
Anyway, as the kids say, read the whole thing. So he's got a whole piece about that if people are interested, and I will just pop that in the list for you, so people can find it later if they want to look at the roundup.
There's hardly an article more voxy than that, but okay.
Yeah,
in case you
that was
want
pretty
to have
good,
it,
but he's right.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, have your own thoughts confirmed by Ezra. He's a nice writer.
Right. So, for example, Schultz was on his CNN town hall and saying, sure, I pay higher taxes, but I'm not telling you how much.
Well, he's like the guy on Price is Right. One penny more he's going to bet.
Right, exactly. All right, so that's what else is going on.
That's it? Okay.
Let's see. Aaron Blake has a piece saying, plenty of people reacting to my piece on Oleg Deripaska's denial of ever meeting with Kalimnik.
Oh, okay.
Why should anybody believe him?
I don't know.
Right? That's because there's a front page Washington Post story all about how Manafort and Kalimnik meeting at a New York City cigar bar
Right.
with Rick Gates, after which everybody left by a different entrance so they wouldn't be seen together, is merely circumstantial evidence.
So?
That Robert Mueller now knows everything about because Rick Gates has turned state's evidence.
Okay. So what, Aaron Blake is writing that?
So
that?
Oleg Deripaska denies he ever interacted with Konstantin Kalimnik.
Me too.
Ever.
Okay, sure.
Some have suggested Kalimnik might have met with the Putin ally and relayed his messages to Manafort, but now he denies it.
Okay, me too.
Okay. And what's new here is the second part of the denial. Deripaska is saying he never has even spoken with Kalimnik.
Okay, sure.
Right? And should we
That's what I
believe
would
him?
say.
With all our assumptions about the Russian investigation, it's worth questioning this one. Whom Kalimnik met and what messages he relayed are hugely important. Even if it's not Deripaska, it could be someone just as problematic, but it underlines how much uncertainty remains about precisely what happened. In other words, Mueller knows a whole lot more than Aaron Blake and the rest of us. And every single time a little breadcrumb falls, everybody jumps on it and says, oh, it must mean this. That becomes relevant because yesterday the Washington Post had a poll that they published about how things are going. And the new Post-ABC poll said by 56 to 33, Americans trust Mueller's version of the facts over Trump's. By 57-36, they say Mueller's trying to find out the truth rather than hunting Trump for political reasons. It's not a witch hunt. The exact opposite of how people felt about Ken Starr, by the way. The numbers are reversed with Ken Starr. But at the same time, they don't quite know what to make of the information they have at this point. Now, the Post interprets that last piece as problematic, and I interpret it differently. What do Americans think Mueller's probe has proven so far? That Russia tried to interfere with the 2016 election. 43% say has proven, 43% has not proven.
Okay.
And equally split among about Trump's 2016 campaign lying about contacts with Russians. And as for whether they actually coordinated with Russia, 34% has proven and 54% has not proven. And that Trump tried to interfere with the investigation in a way that obstructed justice, 28% has proven and 57% has not proven. All right, so people are kind of split about Russia's interference. I think that's proven. Yeah. They're split about the contacts with Russians. I think that's proven. In fact, Mike Flynn is in trouble over it.
Okay.
Trump's campaign coordinated with the Russians. Sure, that's not proven at this point. And he tried to interfere with the investigation and obstructed it. Sure, that's not proven at this point. So the Post interprets this as, well, Mueller has a real hard time because now he's going to have to prove stuff that people aren't willing to accept yet. And I look at it and say, that's because nobody knows what Mueller's going to say yet.
Yes.
And if Mueller's report or his prosecutions or his speaking indictments, lay this out, then it's going to hit as a bombshell because the public's not prepped and prepared to say, okay, I knew this already. They don't know it already.
Do you think that they should be laying groundwork for that somehow?
Well, I think the role of the Senate.
Yeah.
That's what the investigative committees in the Senate and the House ought to be doing.
Okay. Well, you can only do it in the House.
You can only do it in the House, but Mark Warner can do a little bit of it in the Senate. Yes, and that's why, again, this whole thing about, Richard Burr said there's no direct evidence tying them together. Well, that's the kind of fast-talking con job stuff that confuses the public. because circumstantial evidence is plenty enough to convict you if it's strong enough.
Yes. And it was pointed out, one first pointed out this morning, hey, Mark Warner says that's not actually true, and then immediately afterward pointed out from rank-and-file Democrats saying, yes, that is true that it's not true, and you should have said so yesterday. Please don't wait so long next time.
Right. Whoever says it first and loudest wins.
Yeah.
In media world, because they don't focus on that. But all of that gets blown away by an actual Mueller finding, report, or action.
That would be helpful, too. Yes.
So there's a lot to wait for.
Yeah.
And we don't know how it all turns out. So I don't look at that as being a negative. People are fairly convinced, right, that Mueller's version of the facts is actually the better one to pay attention to, even if they haven't heard it yet. And they say Mueller's trying to find out the truth, even if they haven't heard it yet. And to me, that says what he says really matters.
Okay. Yes, well, it is true. Oh, now the Aaron Blake's, is this, where's the Aaron Blake article? I'm looking around for it. Or was it on Twitter that he was saying this? Or?
Well, no, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
He was saying it on Twitter, but he also said it in his own paper.
Okay. He's got a platform.
There it is.
Turns out. Okay, great. We'll hang on to that so people can read and evaluate that. There we are. Okay, well, I don't know. He's got to write about something.
And this is the main headline today. How Manafort's 2016 meeting with a Russian employee at New York Cigar Club goes to the heart of Mueller's probe. Yes. Because that's what one of the prosecutors, I guess Andrew Weissman, said in court to the judge. And so, again, this is one of those situations. I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internets. But if a prosecutor says in the court record to a judge that I think this is significant or this happened or it is our opinion that this is what we're trying to say happened, yet to be proven, or it is part of the reason why, for example, we're telling you that Manafort lied to us. I mean, that court record is substantive truth. Very different than a talking head's opinion about whether or not it matters. It just carries so much more weight.
Yes, I mean, I suppose you can posit almost anything as a theory in court, but it doesn't. You don't just pull things out of thin air in that context.
I'm just saying it's better than a Glenn Kessler fact check.
Okay. All. Well, I'd accept it as more interesting, certainly. And I mean, this is the meeting in the cigar bar has been well known for some time. Although I think it was the first time I ever heard it mentioned that they all made sure to leave from different exits. How many exits should a cigar bar have, anyway?
At least 3.
I guess, right. You can't have trilateral meetings go undetected. I am curious about how they get all of this information. If they all deny being together, who tells them that they were? I'm curious. But I guess Gates
tells them. Yeah. I want to know who's the low-ranking guy that had to go out the kitchen. That was probably Gates.
Yeah.
And who's the high-ranking one who gets to go out the front door?
Yeah. Well, it's all very. I guess Kalimnik could go out the front door. Hardly anybody.
That's
would
what
know
I'm
him.
thinking. And Manafort goes out the side, and Gates go out the back.
Yeah, no one would recognize him. Or, like you posit, I mean, it is possible. It's been thrown out as an alternative theory along the way that the Russians are the senior partners in this.
Yeah. Weissman said in the hearing that one of the special counsel's main tasks is to examine contacts between Americans and Russia during the 2016 race and determine whether Trump associates conspired with the Russian-backed interference campaign. That meeting and what happened at that meeting is of significance to the special counsel, he said pointedly.
Right. Here comes Kalimnik.
That was pointedly.
Yeah, well, she caught him. She knows what Kalimnik looks like.
Right, exactly. So what's happening is the ice is cracking, and every single time noise gets outside, she sets her off.
Oh.
So let's see. There's just Russians interacted with at least 14 Trump associates during the campaign in transition. This is just a factual piece from December 2018 in the Washington Post. I guess the point I'm making is that when the public says that they're not sure that it's been proven that the Trump campaign and Trump associates interacted with Russia, but there's at least 14 proven times it did. tells me they're not paying attention.
Okay.
And the report, when it hits, in whatever form it hits, is going to have impact because they've already said they believe Mueller. They don't know what he's going to say, and they're unaware of some of the basic facts, like the interaction was extensive.
Yeah. Well, okay, then I recommend that the form that the report take is one of those with a folder in it that has black and white photos taken through, spy cameras and telephoto lenses of guilty-looking Trump employees talking to. Yeah, so it's got to be like
I have
mob
two other
pictures.
alternatives. We could do it like a graphic novel, like The Watchmen, or we could do a half hour with music, kind of like Schoolhouse Rock.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Although that's lyrically demanding.
It is, but, I think it'd be well worth the time. So I got to leave it at that and clean up and go skate over to work, literally skate over to work, and see what Abby's barking at. But anyway, that's my piece for today. A little of this, a little of that. But I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll see if we can make more inferences about what Trump says he's going to do or not going to do. Of course, the Congress has to pass these things.
That's
before
true.
Trump decides whether to sign them, and this process there.
Yeah, it's not too difficult, but I mean, I guess this is the interesting part: is the deal came out last night?
Yeah.
And how many days are they supposed to have to read it before they get to vote on it?
I don't know. Don't you get to waive that because you make the rules?
Oh yeah. Well, they'll probably go ahead and do that. Nothing on the floor about that today. It will be a little soon for that. So I guess Thursday, you'll see the House work on it. And I thought they were supposed to have, I think they
and
like
then
to
Thursday
say 3
night
days.
or Friday morning.
But maybe for a conference report, it's shorter. And I guess this might count as a conference report. I don't know. Is it a conference report? I can't. The Senate didn't pass anything, so it shouldn't be. Yeah. Although who knows what the hell. I don't know. I'll have to look it up. But it won't be today. Tomorrow at the earliest. The Senate might be able to squeeze it in Thursday night.
Didn't the Senate pass all those half bills that Shelby had out there?
Oh, yeah, and I suppose they could send one of those to conference with the House bill as long as they had the same number on them.
Yeah.
I don't know if they did, though. We'll have to look that up.
Right.
Okay. We'll figure it out.
I'll talk to you tomorrow, and then maybe we'll figure it out, which is to say maybe you will have.
Right. I'll probably have forgotten. Remind me tomorrow.
I love
do it for Friday.
Take care.
Okay. Thanks. You do the same. Watch the ice. Go slowly. And, all right. Well, what are they working on today? On the House floor, I see, is House Joint Resolution 37, directing the removal of United States Armed Forces from hostilities in the Republic of Yemen that have not been authorized by Congress. I don't know that they are necessarily on the ground in Yemen, but I suppose any armed forces participating in or facilitating Saudi or UAE operations in Yemen, I guess, would be affected. That ought to be, I don't think it's going to be a close call in the House. And let's see, one postponed suspension. It doesn't look like it's particularly dramatic in any way. So that leaves the floor open for Thursday for discussion of the agreement. We'll have to track down the provenance of what is the legislative vehicle through which the agreement will be brought to the floor. And once we figure that out, we can tell you a little bit more about how it's going to go. And one of the first things I noticed this morning was a piece in the Hill about this Yemen resolution, although I thought it might be about the shutdown avoiding deal. It's not. The headline doesn't tell you exactly what it's about, but now you'll know, now that we've previewed what's on the floor today. Congress poised to put Trump in veto bind. For putting him in any binds I can imagine. President Trump has not issued a veto. Did you know that? Hasn't issued a veto since taking office more than 2 years ago, but that may soon change. When it comes to personal confrontation, he's not particularly brave. He likes to yell and scream and fight with people verbally, but he doesn't like to confront anybody directly, including firing people, even though that's how he became famous. Anyway, the House will move a step closer to a major confrontation with Trump. Can you believe it? by voting as soon as Wednesday, that's today, which is true, that's when they do plan to vote on it, on a resolution that would cut off U.S. military support to the Saudi-led coalition in neighboring Yemen. The measure is expected to easily pass the chamber controlled by Democrats. After that, it will move to the GOP-led Senate, where it is also expected to have enough votes, which means that there's bipartisan opposition to the war in Yemen. Book it. Once the resolution reaches his desk, Trump will be faced with the decision of whether to follow through on a White House-issued veto threat for a resolution his administration characterized as flawed. I am hopeful the president may sign it. I know it's uphill still. Representative Ro Khanna of California, the lead House sponsor, told The Hill in a phone interview, "You can't be for withdrawal in Afghanistan and withdrawal in Syria and then say we need to escalate the war in Yemen. It just doesn't make sense." I don't know that it doesn't make any particular sense, but I mean, if the premise is we're against having American troops deployed in foreign conflicts, then it doesn't make sense. But you certainly could be for withdrawal in Afghanistan as a conflict that no longer makes sense for America to be involved in. And you could oppose involvement in Syria on the same grounds and yet say, sure, Yemen is a great place to be. I don't really know what the logic is that gets you there, but I don't know that what he's saying is true, but I'll take it because it's a broad brushstroke that sounds like it makes sense, will get published in the newspaper, and will convince lots of people to take the position that we ought to withdraw from any involvement in the war in Yemen, and I believe we should. So I'll just accept his gloss on it and move on from there. Khanna downplayed the potential of confronting Trump with his first veto, saying, "I don't want to politicize the issue." Okay, fair enough. And also, who cares whether he's vetoed anything in the past or not? This is something that should be passed, and we're going to pass it. And if he issues his first veto, whoop-de-frickin-do, I guess is basically what, I mean, I wish he wouldn't. I don't know whether there are votes enough to override it. So from a substantive standpoint, that's not what I mean. I hope he would be inclined to sign the thing and honor it. But, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, he downplayed the potential of confronting Trump with his first veto. Why wouldn't you downplay that? I really don't care. What if it was his fourth veto? That wouldn't matter, right? I mean, and it's not like presidents get extra pay if they don't veto anything. There's nothing on the line, in other words. That's entirely manufactured, and I guess they thought they were going to get something out of him on that, and he didn't play that game. The issue is not to score points against the administration or make this a Democratic or Republican issue, he added. The issue is what can the United States do to avert a famine that could affect 14 million people? Nothing yet, because you already have it, but what can we do to try and bring an end to it, I suppose, besides direct intervention? The resolution would direct the president to withdraw U.S. military forces in or affecting Yemen within 30 days unless they are fighting al-Qaeda or associated forces. So that's an interesting out. And the sort of thing that gets included in resolutions of this type all the time on the premise that the president won't just lie and say, well, I don't want to withdraw from Yemen. And I don't have to. If I say they're fighting al-Qaeda, then they're fighting al-Qaeda. Normally, even though the temptation to say so would be overwhelming, and the national security implications and classified information surrounding such a decision would make it awfully tempting for a George W. Bush type, or for that matter, a Barack Obama type, if they wanted to remain involved in Yemen, to say, sure, then in that case, they're fighting al-Qaeda and the evidence is classified. You're just going to have to take my word for it. We do find ourselves in situations like that all the time. Anyway, no indication yet whether that would be the case here. No particular indication of Trump's passion for remaining involved in Yemen either, except for the fact that he seems to love the money that he gets from the Sauds and the ruling families of the UAE, and they may threaten to take some of that away. If this happens, we'll see. The United States has been providing logistics, intelligence sharing, and arms sales to the Saudi-led coalition fighting Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Previously, the U.S. military also provided aerial refueling to coalition jets, but the administration suspended that support in November. I guess when we found out, oh yeah, we never billed them for any of it. It doesn't say they're trying to collect, it just says they're not selling any more of it. Lawmakers' anger reached a fever pitch last year after the slaying of U.S.-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. During the height of the ire, the Senate passed a Yemen War Powers Resolution similar to the one now being considered in the House, with 7 Republicans siding with Democrats. The measure did not advance in the House, which was controlled by Republicans at the time. Bipartisan anger started bubbling up again after Trump declined to adhere to a congressionally mandated deadline Friday to report on whether Saudi leadership, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Mr. Bonesaw, is responsible for Khashoggi's killing. He is, and should be sanctioned. He should. On the day of the deadline, Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry warned on Twitter that, quote, our leadership, that is coming after our leadership, is a red line. And we know how effective red lines in the sand in the Middle East are. We warn against any attempt to link Khashoggi's crime, wow, to our leadership, the ministry added. Well, tough noogies, I would say, if we were a sovereign country, but we're not. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo this week responded to congressional critics who said the lack of adherence to the deadline shows the administration is helping cover up a crime, which, with Pompeo saying, that's flat out wrong. Can you believe it? He goes on to say it in more words than just that, but it apparently is actually flat out right. That is another example of how to read a Trumpster comment. Trademark. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I told you we would just be gone for a minute. Let's continue. There's actually some interesting procedure information and background information still left here in the Hill piece on the Yemen resolution. And since that's taking place today, it's our only chance to get the information out there. So Pompeo, as Secretary of State, says that the fact that the administration has declined to comply with requirements regarding sanctions against Saudi Arabia over the Khashoggi murder is not such a big deal. And in fact, it's flat out wrong. And he says, America has taken more action in response to the tragic murder of Jamal Khashoggi and will continue to take more action, continue our investigation. Wow, what about that? He told reporters this as they were traveling with him in Budapest. We are working diligently on that. The president has been very clear. Couldn't have been more clear. As we get additional information, we'll continue to hold all of those responsible accountable. But Congress is fuming about being ignored and will have its first chance to voice its displeasure with the House vote. And that's true. You can absolutely bring pressure to bear on a separate but possibly related issue when there's one player in common to both. Listen, if you want this to happen, you're going to have to take care of that. Easy enough to make the link. Congress, as I said, fuming about being ignored. Here comes the first vote. The slaughter and the starvation and the water and all the things that are going on in Yemen that are atrocious. Some extemporaneous remarks here, I can see. Coupled with Khashoggi and his murder, bring all of this to the fore, Representative Earl Perlmutter of Colorado said at a House Rules Committee hearing on the Yemen resolution. It's hard to feel any affection or some obligation to a regime that does that kind of stuff. It is hard. It's hard work. The White House on Monday issued a statement saying Trump's senior advisors would recommend he veto the joint resolution if it reaches his desk. Presidential veto threats, very frequently phrased in that language, and not always an indication of an actual forthcoming veto, but it's always out there. Happens this way a lot. The statement of administrative administration policy, argued the resolution has an erroneous premise because U.S. forces are not directly engaged in combat. Because the president has directed United States forces to support the Saudi-led coalition under his constitutional powers, the joint resolution would raise serious constitutional concerns to the extent it seeks to override the president's determination as commander-in-chief, the White House said. That's actually a pretty standard position as well. The administration further argued that the measure would, quote, harm bilateral relationships by defining hostilities as including defense cooperation, such as aerial refueling, which has already been suspended, possibly just over money issues. But you can't really make your objection be the damage that could be done to aerial refueling if you're not doing aerial refueling. Our continued cooperation with regional partner nations allows the United States to support diplomatic negotiations to end the conflict. That's still going to be true even under the resolution. Promote humanitarian access, mitigate civilian casualties, enhance efforts to recover United States hostages in Yemen. Are there any? I imagine there very well may be, and that we don't know about them because we don't pay enough attention to that news. And defeat terrorists who seek to harm the United States, the White House added. It's an argument that has found sympathy from House Republicans who have shown no sign of supporting the War Powers Resolution, even as they expressed frustration at Trump's response to the Khashoggi killing. Now, some technical points. They stand to a certain extent, so we'll add them here. Representative Michael McCall of Texas, ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, has said he was, quote, deeply troubled, just like Susan Collins, deeply troubled by the administration ignoring the sanctions deadline, but later characterized the resolution as a misuse of the War Powers Act. It didn't present itself in the first round of argument from Ro Khanna that this was being brought under the War Powers Act, but I suppose that could be the case. U.S. armed forces, he said, are not engaged in hostilities against Houthi forces in Yemen. This resolution stretches the definition of hostilities to cover non-U.S. military operations by other countries, for which we're providing material support, of course. McCall, how does he say that? McCall said he and Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Elliot Engel of New York sent a very strongly, in quotes, very strongly worded statement, a strongly worded statement, to the administration Sunday about the lack of sanctions report on Khashoggi, but that, quote, it has really nothing to do with Yemen, unquote. House Democrats will not need Republican support to send the resolution to the Senate and are charging forward, with supporters arguing the resolution is a long overdue chance for Congress to reassert its authority on war and force the Saudis to negotiate peace in Yemen. It's great to see the House of Representatives finally taking decisive action to end the war in Yemen, Khanna said. It sends an incredible message. The United States Congress has never in our history passed a war powers resolution since 1973. Never happened. So apparently he thinks it should and that this would be it. So, all right. He believes he's bringing a War Powers Act resolution. And McCowell believes it is misguided and not necessarily that it's misguided, but that it's a misapplication of the War Powers Act. And it may be that that's the case. I don't think I speak, though. Well, I don't have enough familiarity with the intricacies of the War Powers Act to say whether or not this falls under it if there aren't American troops engaged directly in hostilities. I don't know that if it's limited to that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. But it also wouldn't surprise me if that were explicitly not the case, but Republicans were hinting that it was, because they knew that most people were unfamiliar or off the top of their heads with the details of the War Powers Act, and that would sound like it was a legitimate argument until we found out later that it wasn't and it was all made up, by which time the press conference is over, the articles have been written, and everyone's come to the conclusion that they were right the first time around. That has happened. Happens a lot, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was happening again. But then again, wouldn't surprise me if it turned out that it was really the case, that it was overstepping the authority of the War Powers Act. Okay, let's see. Okay, so some more info from Greg on, I guess we'll call it follow-up to the issue of Richard Burr and his declaration that the Senate had found, I think as he would put it, no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And, of course, Mark Warner coming out and saying, no, that's not actually what the conclusion said. And that's believable enough. But let's see. What he sent us here is the tweet of Ryan Goodman, who says, I've spent enormous time and effort researching this article. Who is Richard Burr really? Why the public can't trust his voice in the Russia probe? Burr's words and deeds in the 2016 campaign raised very serious concerns. Now, this was not immediately apparent to me, and so perhaps it bears further investigation. It just so happens that an article is attached by Ryan Goodman at Just Security, and let's find out. What is Richard Burr all about? And is there good reason to distrust what conclusion he says he's drawn from the Senate's Intelligence Committee investigation? On the same day that Senator Richard Burr, North Carolina, again, officially joined the Trump campaign as a senior national security advisor, that's really all, that's enough right there to say, might he be biased in his investigation? Yes, he might. But on the same day that he did this, joined the Trump campaign as senior national security advisor, the U.S. intelligence community released a statement that the Kremlin was trying to interfere in the election. But the senator already knew those facts and much more. Burr had been fully briefed in secret by the U.S. intelligence community a few weeks earlier. Senior U.S. officials told Burr that Russia's interference was designed to support Donald Trump's electoral chances. Interesting that he then subsequently joins the Trump campaign. Oh, you're saying the Russians are interfering in the election on behalf of Trump? I guess I ought to join the Trump campaign. That is a little odd. Burr decided to team up with the Trump campaign anyway and hitch his own electoral fate in North Carolina to Trump's political fortunes, which is something I guess you could do theoretically, independent of any knowledge you had about what the Russians were doing. You're a Republican senator running for re-election at some point anyway, and there is a Republican nominee running for election right now. He'll be running in your state. Voters there will be voting. They will want to see that you're signed on with the Republican program. And that can all be considered entirely separate, theoretically anyway, from the fact that, well, the person who's been nominated as a Republican has close ties to Russia and every reason in the world to accept and be interested in coordinating with Russian assistance in winning that election. And if he wins, then his stock goes up. And if he wins and his stock goes up and you were signed on to his campaign, then you win and your stock goes up. It can't be entirely separated from it, but you could cast some doubt on it in a courtroom proceeding. Did I join his campaign because Russians were helping it, and therefore I thought he would win, and therefore I wanted to be part of that, or and therefore that means I wanted to be part of the collusion, or did I decide to sign on with the winner because that's what you do in politics? I thought he would win. I did think that Russian interference might make it more likely for him to win, but I was dismayed of that interference. But a win is a win, and I wanted to be associated with it one way or another. And I made a promise to myself in so doing that I would not speak to any Russians, nor approve of anyone else doing so. You could make the case that that's what he was trying to do. I mean, it's a dumb case. I don't believe it. It would be difficult to believe that as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, you thought you could somehow skate through fire and, thread the needle that way. But I guess you could try to convince me of that. Anyway, to continue with the article, not doing too much more speculation of my own. More than 2 years later, Burr now leads the Senate's flagship investigation into whether fellow members of the Trump campaign colluded with Russia's efforts. As the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Burr's work with Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, on the investigation is heading toward its final stage. The committee is expected to issue its major findings in the coming months. So I guess the premise of the article can be summarized thus. Should the Senate's investigation into whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with Russia in 2016 be led by someone who worked for Trump in 2016? Normally the answer is no. Burr has received remarkably favorable press coverage for his stewardship of the investigation. Many mainstream commentators have heralded his committee as a bipartisan effort to follow the facts and tell the American public what it finds. Closer observation, however, raises serious questions whether that's how this chapter in the 2016 election saga will end. What's largely escaped scrutiny is the case of Burr's own words and deeds during the 2016 campaign. It was impossible to put the pieces together back then. We now have a much clearer picture due to news reports, court filings by the special counsel, and a congressional testimony by former administration officials. We have learned a lot about what Russia is doing, what the U.S. intelligence community knew, and what Burr was told. The picture that emerges is neither favorable for Burr personally, nor for what truths Americans can expect to receive from his stewardship of the committee in the months ahead. And I guess here I would remind you of that recorded conversation between House leadership figures in which they all essentially admitted that they knew what Russia was up to and that they had plans to expand it to other democracies in the West and that it was diabolical and ought to be stopped. And some of them thought the United States was the only country in the world acting to stop it, and others acknowledged, no, we are not doing anything. And then finally, they were all sworn to secrecy about it for the good of the Republican election effort. Burr is not there. He's not mentioned in it, but now we know that as chair of the Intelligence Committee, he would have been briefed in these things as well, and would have had to have put them aside to effectively decide to ignore them in order to join the Trump campaign in good conscience afterwards. However, if you think it's impossible for him to have put that knowledge aside, but acknowledge the fact that he did in fact join the Trump campaign afterward, you can only then come to one conclusion, that he did so in bad faith. That's not so good. So, next section of the article here, Richard Burr in the 2016 presidential election. It's a remarkable feat that Burr has held the position of overseeing the Senate's Russia investigation given what was known at the time he assumed the role. It was well understood that Burr did not remain on the sidelines during the 2016 presidential election. As chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Burr was a major catch for the Trump campaign when he joined as National Security Advisor on October 7th, 2016. Really, what he's trying to say here at this point is, in a fairer world where we weren't constantly distracted by scandals large and small on a daily or in fact hourly basis, Americans in time past would have likely been out in protest demanding Burr's resignation as Senate Intelligence Committee chair, given that he was going to be asked to investigate a campaign on which he served. If it were his own campaign, no one would allow him to conduct this investigation. But instead, it was a campaign which he served as a senior national security advisor, being asked, to investigate the role of, being asked to investigate the national security implications of Russia's coordination with the Trump campaign. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's a very big conflict of interest. In a race for his own re-election at the time, Burr also tied himself closely to Trump. When the Access Hollywood tapes broke by happenstance on the same day that Burr joined the campaign, many Republicans took it as an opportunity to flee Trump. Burr instead embraced the beleaguered candidate and said that Trump had sufficiently apologized. Burr brushed off any criticisms of his closeness to Trump in the ensuing weeks. At his own campaign rally in Gastonia, North Carolina, in late October, Burr told the crowd, "There is not a separation between me and Donald Trump," which means he shouldn't be investigating this whole thing. With these facts alone, Burr might have been compelled to recuse himself from overseeing any Russia investigation if he had taken a position in the administration. Fellow traveler Jeff Sessions found himself barred from overseeing the Russia investigation as Attorney General due to his own participation in the campaign's national security group. It wasn't like it was an automatic result, though. I'm sure. It's a mistake to say that he found himself barred. Certainly shame would have stood in the way of overcoming that, but he had to make the decision himself. There's nothing automatic about it, which explains how Burr could have gone on to do that with even Jeff Sessions was too embarrassed to try. Department of Justice regulations state that no employee can be involved in an investigation if he or she had a political relationship with an organization that's substantially involved in the conduct that is the subject of the investigation, which the regulations go on to specify includes a close identification with a campaign organization arising from service as a principal advisor. That's the rule by which Jeff Sessions recused himself, but no such rule exists for senators and chairmanships of the Intelligence Committee or anything else, I guess. And if they do, they can just ignore them and be safe. While Sessions' hands were tied, Burr's hands in the Senate were free. Burr's control of the investigation would be decided essentially by his own conscience and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's discretion, two non-existent entities, I would argue. Next up, Burr gets read into intelligence on Russia's efforts to help Trump. When Burr assumed the lead of the Russia investigation, it was not widely known that there was something entirely unique about his role in the Trump campaign. Unlike any of the other senior advisors who joined the campaign, when Burr signed up, he was privy to the U.S. intelligence community's findings that Russian President Vladimir Putin was engaged in an effort to interfere in the election to support Trump. So he's almost insider trading on that. Why should I be national security advisor to Trump? Because he's got it in the bag. Little does anyone else know. Putin is coordinating an effort to make sure that he wins. Since January of 2015, Burr has been a member of the Gang of Eight, a group that consists of the majority and minority leaders of the Senate and House, and top Republicans and Democrats on the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. The U.S. intelligence community is able to share the nation's most sensitive secrets with this small group without anyone else outside the administration knowing. As far back as the summer of 2015, the U.S. intelligence community reportedly informed the Gang of Eight that Russia's intelligence agencies were engaged in a hacking operation against the DNC. That was many months before the DNC was aware of the breach and months before the FBI reached out to the DNC to inform the organization. In July of 2016, when Trump called on Russia, if you're listening, to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, several Republican leaders directly and indirectly criticized him. A spokesperson for the House Majority Leader, then Paul Ryan, wait a minute. He would, I don't know why they name him that. He would, of course, have been Speaker of the House. He, a Republican member of the Gang of Eight, said, Russia is a global menace led by a devious thug. Putin should stay out of this election. But he changed his tune later on. Senator Burr's office, however, appeared to deflect attention away from Russia. A spokeswoman for Burr told Politico, Burr has said for some time that foreign adversaries are intent on gaining unauthorized access into our country's government and private networks to access sensitive data. Politico noted that instead of talking about Trump's statement, Burr's spokeswoman mostly focused on the FBI investigations on the recent hacking attack at the DNC's email servers, telling the news outlet that public discussion about attribution are premature at best. By that point, however, not only did Burr know that the intelligence community had attributed the DNC hack to Russia, but the U.S. intelligence services even knew in the summer of 2015 the specific unit and agents within Russia's intelligence services who performed the hacking. Among other specific data, Dutch intelligence agencies, remember that story, had for months reportedly accessed security cameras in the hackers' Moscow offices and handed that information over to their American counterparts. As the U.S. presidential campaign headed into the general elections, the U.S. intelligence community gained a more comprehensive view of the Kremlin's actions and intentions. Increasingly concerned by what they saw, senior U.S. intelligence officials updated the small group of congressional leaders. From August 11th to September 6th, 2016, the CIA organized a series of urgent individual briefings for the 8 top members of Congress. The CIA informed Burr and the others that the U.S. intelligence community had discovered the Kremlin was working to help elect Trump, and that unnamed advisors to Mr. Trump might be working with the Russians. You are such a person, Mr. Burr. With this information in hand, Burr decided not only to join the Trump campaign and tie his political fate to Trump, Burr also took the now difficult to explain step of publicly repudiating suggestions that the Russians were acting in support of Trump. In an October 3rd, 2016 interview, Burr said, "I have yet to see anything that would lead me to believe Russia was interfering to benefit Trump." It was also a notable exception to Burr's reputation for avoiding speaking with the press. Most important, we now know that what Burr said in the interview was inconsistent with what the CIA had told him. Former CIA Director John Brennan would later testify before Congress that he had kept Burr and the others in the Gang of Eight fully informed. The full details of what we knew at the time was shared only with these members of Congress, Brennan said. The substance of those briefings was entirely consistent with the main judgments contained in the January classified and unclassified assessments, namely that Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency, and try to help President Trump's election chances. In the summer of 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies were tracking an additional threat from Russia, this one directed against the voting systems of different states. Again, Burr made public statements that were at odds with what he had been told by the U.S. intelligence communities. In his October 3rd interview with Foreign Policy, the news organization wrote that Burr said, quote, said, "Actual manipulation of the vote can't happen," unquote, because the DHS has assured lawmakers that no U.S. ballot machines are connected to the Internet. Foreign Policy also noted the discrepancy between Burr's statements and the New York Times reporting days later that DHS was actively trying to protect states' online voting systems against cyber threats. What's worse, we now know that DHS and the intelligence agencies secretly briefed Burr the previous month about their grave concerns of Russian threats to state voting systems. In early September 2016, President Obama had dispatched 3 senior U.S. officials, including DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, Homeland Security Advisor Lisa Monaco, and FBI Director James Comey, to brief the Gang of 12, now we're up to 12, a group that includes the Gang of 8, plus the chairs and ranking members of the committees on Homeland Security. So we moved from 8 to 12 on that one. The White House wanted the congressional leaders to agree to a bipartisan statement urging state and local officials to take federal help in protecting their voting registration and balloting machines from Russian cyber intrusions, the Washington Post reported. McConnell nixed the idea and remained steadfast, despite Paul Ryan's effort to persuade the Senate Majority Leader to change his mind. Yet even McConnell's stance, declining to issue a joint public statement, was far shy of Burr's tack of making public statements inconsistent with the intelligence information. That's true. That seems much worse. More after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and we are here on Netroots Radio. I almost forgot that part for some reason. Very weird. Okay, so let's see. We can continue with the rest of our reading. I think we should just continue to get all the way through this piece. It's actually quite long, but I'm finding it a worthwhile use of our time. I don't know. I, for some reason, didn't put all of this together on Burr. It was all out there, and somehow that escaped my immediate attention. That the basics, long story short here, the guy who declares on behalf of the Senate Intelligence Committee that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia was a key figure on the Trump campaign and should probably never have been allowed to conduct this investigation from the chair in the first place. How did we forget that? Okay, and a reminder that as mad as you are at Mitch McConnell for declining to issue a joint public statement, as it is put here, about warning of Russia's attempts at cyber intrusions in voter registration and balloting machines, and the entire idea that they were trying to interfere in the 2016 elections in the first place. You all remember that story. We've talked about it a number of times, that President Obama said we need to issue a statement about this in order to get the Russians to back off if we're going to have any hope of having a legitimate election. And McConnell said, if you do that, I'll consider that to be a partisan attack. I'm not participating in any joint statement, and I'm going to accuse you of introducing this idea for partisan reasons. And for some reason, Obama was afraid of that. And I don't know what it was that motivated him to think that, but it seems ridiculous. In hindsight, it may not have been ridiculous at the time. But as mad as we are about McConnell's role in all this, it's pointed out here that that is all far shy of what Burr did. In fact, going out of his way not only not to join in any public statements warning about Russia, but making public statements that there's no threat at all, period, from Russia. The statement's inconsistent with the intelligence information that he was privy to as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, useful to him otherwise as an insider trading on insider information, and his role as senior national security advisor to the Trump campaign. That should just not be allowed. Just generally speaking, I think people would find it shocking, even though it happens all the time. It's the sort of thing that you imagine that there are rules against, that sitting members of Congress could be involved in advising presidential campaigns, although I guess it usually slips by because so infrequently are presidential campaigns accused of crimes that amount to treason or something damn near like it, and on credible grounds. And so usually it's not such a bad thing. Sure, they coordinate. They are political allies. Yes, but in this case, we have an additional problem. They are political allies in facilitating a foreign government's corruption of our electoral system and, in fact, our entire democracy. And that's a bad thing. Okay, back to the story here. Over the course of September, other members of the Gang of 12 publicly referred in broad terms to what they had been told in the intelligence briefings. Burr then cast doubt on their presentation of the facts. On September 9th, in a move perceived to break with Trump, Speaker Ryan called Putin an aggressor and said it certainly appears that he is conducting state-sponsored cyber attacks on what appears to be our political system. What a weird statement. I think you know what our political system is. They appear to be attacks, though, is what he thinks he means anyway. And this, on September 14th, Representative Michael McCaul, once again brought to the floor here, Republican of Texas, the chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security, told CNN, quote, "I have been briefed at a very high-level classified briefing on these Russian allegations. They are very disturbing. The idea of a foreign power, particularly one like Russia, a foreign adversary, attempting to mess with our elections. And Director Comey basically told us that the motivation was to undermine the integrity of the American political electoral process." Wow, that's some statement there, Mr. McCaul. The following week, the ranking member of Burr's committee, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, and her counterpart on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, also of California, issued a statement saying, "Based on briefings we have received, we have concluded that the Russian intelligence agencies are making a serious and concerted effort to influence the U.S. election." Burr's reaction? Like his spokeswoman's statement that summer, he deflected attention away from Russia. He said that his fellow congressional members' warnings were probably incorrect and that they give the impression there's one cyber problem in the world, Russia and the elections, and that's a huge understatement. It's an interesting deflection. It is not clear specifically which of his congressional colleagues' warnings Burr was referencing at the time, nor is it actually clear what other cyber problems in the world he was referencing. But, that's not even a good deflection statement, quite honestly. Well, they're wrong about Russia making an effort to influence the U.S. election because there's lots of cyber problems out there. Well, that doesn't mean that there isn't a Russian one. I know, but that's the end of my statement. Thank you. Bye. Next up, the October 7th U.S. intelligence community statement. Burr had a new choice to make once the U.S. intelligence community released its October 7th statement, which came 4 days after his interview with Foreign Policy. Most chilling were the first two sentences of the 3-paragraph statement by Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Homeland Security Secretary Johnson. Quoted here, "The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like WikiLeaks," there's some ellipses here, "are consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts." Burr would later act like those sentences did not exist. It was a head-turning moment in a nationally televised debate for the North Carolina Senate seat, which we weren't watching, even though they say it was nationally televised. Prior to his debate, Burr was hemmed in by Trump's statements attempting to contradict the intelligence community. 2 days after the Clapper-Johnson statement, Trump said in a Sunday night presidential debate against Hillary Clinton, quote, "She doesn't know if it's the Russians doing the hacking. Maybe there is no hacking, but they always blame Russia. They always blame Russia." Politico published a roundup of Republicans repudiating Trump on this issue, noting that Burr issued a, quote, brief statement, deferring to the intelligence community's release, stating, quote, I believe it sufficiently covers what we believe to be the case at this time, unquote. Burr's statement was non-specific. He would be given an opportunity to clarify in the next few days. That Wednesday night, Burr faced off against his opponent. The moment came when the debate moderator, ABC's Jonathan Karl, asked Burr point blank whether he chose to believe President Trump or the U.S. intelligence community. Burr first appeared to stand behind the administration's statement, but wasn't specific. Karl followed up, and Burr stammered. In a meandering answer, he said, it's not limited to Russia, it's Iran, it's North Korea, it's China. Burr also said he doubted Karl's sources. Interesting. So, North Korea and China, two fantastic, wonderful countries led by amazing leaders who both deserve lots of chocolate cake. Okay. So, interesting. So, look, point blank. Do you believe Trump on this or the U.S. intelligence community? I doubt your sources. How do you doubt my sources? He said it on television. We all saw it. After a commercial break, Karl made more explicit that his source was the Clapper-Johnson statement and read the first line of the statement verbatim. Burr replied, I don't think that really had anything to do with the emails or the political parties, and added, I'm not sure that the reports that you read are from official sources. Karl was exasperated. Okay, it was a joint statement from the Director of National Intelligence and the intelligence community. Let's move on to the next question. And he says here, it's worth watching the full 7 minutes, and it's linked in here, the full 7 minutes in the exchange in full. Although I would suggest to you that it might not be. I think that sums it up right there. Karl's exasperated. It was absolutely an official source, but we'll have to leave it there. Let's move on to the next question. I mean, I know they have other things to debate. It's true, but that's just an amazing example of, a number of our problems in this country and the problem that television-formatted debates actually give us. And I'm not certain how we work around them, but the fact that they're time-limited means that if you want to cover anything else, you just have to accept a filibustering BS answer like this. I mean, basically, he reads them this report, and Burr's response is, I don't know what that is. That's just a bunch of words. Well, it comes from the Director of National Intelligence and the entirety of the intelligence community and the Homeland Security Secretary. I don't know if that's a real source. I doubt your source. Anyway, the point is, it doesn't really say anything. We have to leave it there. Amazing. The media was perplexed. Politico reported the next morning under the subheading, Burr all over the place on hacks. The Washington Post summarized the exchange, saying, Burr appeared unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge Clapper's statement and dodged when pressed on the issue. How odd. When Burr, as a member of the House of Representatives, ran for Senate in 2004, there was a historical significance to his race that was not lost on the candidate. North Carolina's congressman was the 12th cousin of Aaron Burr. Really? Who had killed Alexander Hamilton and stood trial for treason, that is true, for a plot to take military control over American territory. I hope nobody forgets this. Aaron Burr's stain on American history was likely part of the reason it took nearly 200 years before Burr returned to Congress. Richard Burr had accomplished that feat in 1994 as part of the so-called Newt Gingrich Revolution. I didn't really think about that. That's some stain on the Newt Gingrich Revolution. Newt Gingrich, the guy who brought the Burr family back to Congress. That never occurred to me. Amazing. 10 years later, he was aiming to become the first Burr to win a Senate seat since Aaron Burr represented the state of New York. New York City. Yeah. Interesting. And Burr, the other Burr, was on the show yesterday. He's the guy who screwed up the Senate rule book and created the filibuster by accident. What a family. Shh. Richard Burr's family expressed pride in their connection to the nation's third vice president. His father had served as the president of the Aaron Burr Association in the late 1970s. That was probably him in the Got Milk commercial, eating peanut butter and failing to be able to articulate the correct answer in the radio call-in program. Famous commercial. I don't know if you all know it. Let's see. In 2004, the National Review asked Congressman Burr whether he was proud of his tie to Aaron Burr. "Yes, I am," Burr replied, though history has proved to shine a different light on him because of the treasonous acts. He was reflective and sounded conflicted and maybe thought, I need to do some treason of my own in order to stand up to great-great-great-great-grandpa Aaron or whatever he is. After the 2016 election returned Burr to the Senate, he found himself with the historically significant role of chairing the investigation into whether the President of the United States and members of his campaign helped Russia interfere in the 2016 election. Warner remarked that the investigation may very well be the most important thing I do in my public life. Freed of the pressures of the election season, the question would become how Burr would run the investigation. Over the past 2 years, the Senate Intelligence Committee has produced reports in a bipartisan fashion that contrast sharply with all other congressional investigations into Russian election interference to date. One report found that Russian government operatives conducted an unprecedented, coordinated cyber campaign against state election infrastructure during the presidential election. Another report confirmed the findings of the intelligence community that Russia had interfered in the election in support of Trump. Given what Burr had said in 2016, these fully bipartisan reports were even more significant than many realized. That said, the overwhelming evidence in support of the report's findings appeared to offer no alternative for a reasonable decision maker. What has been alarming to close observers is a series of decision points in the course of the Russia investigation, most especially on the question of collusion, that bring Burr's impartiality into doubt. Here are 10 data points to consider. 1. Burr tried to kill the collusion inquiry from the start. Burr announced that the committee would exclude possible collusion from the scope of the investigation, a move he made with no advance notice to Ranking Member Warner. And so I guess it comes as no surprise that he now says, well, our reports don't find any evidence of collusion. They were designed not to, of course. I don't know whether they stuck by that delineation, but it's out there. Second of the 10 data points to consider, Burr reversed under pressure. Burr reportedly backed down only after Democrats threatened to boycott the investigation if the question of collusion was not included as a topic. So I guess that did make it in there after all. He just didn't want it to. 3, caught in the act, working secretly on behalf of the White House. The Washington Post revealed that the White House secretly enlisted Devin Nunes and Burr to contact news organizations to challenge the New York Times' reporting on contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. The Post notably wrote, unlike the others, Nunes spoke on the record. That was better than what Burr had done. Also of note, CNN and Reuters independently confirmed the New York Times reporting. Burr's conduct was criticized by both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Chuck Schumer said Burr had been put on notice. Big deal. It's really affected him. And that Burr's conduct certainly gives the appearance, if not the reality, of a lack of impartiality. Warner said he had grave concerns about Burr's conduct. Republican Senators Susan Collins and Marco Rubio, both members of the Intelligence Committee, also issued critical statements. To no avail, gee whiz. Number 4, credit where credit is not due. Burr has been credited with not appearing at functions with President Trump and limiting any trips to the White House, but he took this step only after being chastened by the Post report on his and Nunes' contact. Number 5, a painfully slow start, no subpoenas, and lack of requests for evidence. In April of 2017, Michael Isikoff reported the committee has yet to issue a single subpoena for documents or interview any key witnesses who were central. It also hasn't requested potentially crucial evidence, such as the emails, memos, and phone records of the Trump campaign, in part because the panel's chairman, Senator Richard Burr, has so far failed to respond to requests from the panel's Democrats to sign letters doing so, the sources said. So that was all the way up into April of 2017. Number 6, understaffed. The Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation does not have a single staffer dedicated to it full time. And those staff members working on it part-time do not have significant investigative experience, the Daily Beast reported in April of 2017. In a February 2019 interview, Burr defended never hiring outside full-time professional investigators. Outside investigators, he said, would have never had access to some of the documents that we were able to access from the intelligence community, but it's unclear why the committee could not use outside professional investigators or attorneys who have the required security clearances. Simple, right? Number 7, statement on assessing the success of Russian interference. In a widely watched November of 2017 hearing, Burr used his opening remarks to claim that Russian influence operations could not be shown to have affected the election and that a contrary view was biased. Burr said, I want to use this forum to push back on some narratives that have sprung up on the subject. A lot of folks, including many in the media, have tried to reduce this entire conversation to one premise. Foreign actors conducted a surgical, executed covert operation to help elect the United States president. I'm here to tell you this story does not simplify that easily. Burr continued, what we cannot do is calculate the impact that foreign meddling had on this election. It's human nature to make the complex manageable and determine things that fit your conclusions. That's bias. Okay. Number 8, encouraging Trump's attempts to discredit former senior intelligence officials. When President Trump decided to revoke security clearances of former senior intelligence officials, Burr quickly and strongly supported the president. Notably, Burr issued a statement saying a New York Times op-ed that John Brennan wrote justified the president's revoking the former CIA director's clearances. This was unusual reasoning, since Brennan wrote the op-ed following the president's deciding to revoke Brennan's security clearances. Aha. That is unusual then. All right, so Burr issued a statement saying that Brennan's op-ed justified the revocation of the security clearances, even though it had already been done, I guess, after the fact. See, I told you he was right to do it. Vetoing public hearings was number 9 in the data points here. Burr categorically rejects any public hearings with Trump campaign associates, despite Warner's requests and despite the fact that the committee has held several public hearings, including on Russia's manipulation of social media platforms. Finally, number 10 here among the data points, defying his own rules on speaking to the press about the committee's work. Rules are for suckers, you know that. Burr has now repeatedly told media outlets that he has seen no evidence of collusion. The first occasion was in an Associated Press interview in September of 2018. In the same article, the Associated Press reported that Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma says Burr started every meeting at the beginning of the probe by asking senators not to talk to the media until we get additional facts and we put things out together. In 2014, Burr said, I personally don't believe that anything that goes on in the Intelligence Committee should ever be discussed publicly unless I do it. With months still to go in the committee's investigation, Burr has recently made headlines in claiming that he has seen no, quote, hard evidence or factual evidence of collusion. Yet he also seems to acknowledge that reasonable minds on the committee may well consider the facts do amount to evidence of collusion. Burr's conduct during the 2016 campaign, however, haunt his words today. What stands out most of all is Burr's statement in the October 3rd, 2016 interview that he had, quote, yet to see anything that would lead me to believe, unquote, Russia was interfering to benefit Trump, when that's exactly what he was seeing in highly classified intelligence briefings at the time. There was no stray statement. That was no stray statement either. Burr's spokeswoman's July 2016 statement that public discussion about attribution of the DNC hack was premature, along with Burr's troubling Senate debate performance, are additional reminders of how Burr has previously characterized intelligence information for the American public. The true character and public understanding of Senator Richard Burr will be tested in the months ahead. Then history will be left to judge. It's a bit of a stray sentence for the conclusion. I think we just did judge what happened there. That was a very interesting and lengthy piece, but I guess very important part of the context now that there is a fight ongoing between Burr and Warner over what the conclusion of the Senate's investigation really does show. I guess he acknowledges that people of good faith could see things differently, and that's a very whitewashed version of everything he's done in between 2016 and now. But just the idea of taking his word for it is probably a bad idea, and somehow this all escaped me, in addition to his being related to Aaron Burr, in the several months that he's been up to this, which is an amazing phenomenon, and I guess just goes to show you how much non-political junkies must be missing in all of this along the way as well. Actually, kind of a scary thought. Well, that ought to arm you for discussing the statements he's made over the past couple of days. Well, the chairman says that there's no evidence of collusion, so I'm in the clear. Apparently that was a big theme in right-wing circles over the last couple of days, that the president declared himself to have been cleared by it because MSNBC reported that Burr said that. Burr said it because he's got skin in the game. He was on board with the campaign that was colluding, even though he was getting inside information from intelligence sources saying that there was collusion going on at the time. To be the kind of person who would join a campaign that the intelligence community was accusing of collusion, and then running interference on that collusion, and then running interference in the case of, or in the probe of that collusion after the fact, well, that takes a special kind of person, the kind that probably shouldn't be believed. Okay, wow. All right, let's see. Any other things that we can cram in here before we get finished up with these things? Probably not. I don't think there's anything we can get through today, although perhaps we'll just toss out this sort of weird appearance by Tom Barrack, the chair, you remember, of the Inauguration Committee, was reported as making, he's apparently over in Abu Dhabi at the moment, and Ed Clowes, Clowes, maybe close, but because a journalist at Gulf News was covering his talk, and his tweets got a lot of attention yesterday. News, he says, speaking in Abu Dhabi today, key Trump ally Tom Barrack said that, quote, whatever happened in Saudi Arabia, and in brackets here, meaning with regards to the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the atrocities in America are equal or worse to the atrocities in Saudi Arabia. How interesting. And he's got a story about the totality of the comments there. I'll include it. I'll include these tweets in the roundup so that you can read through it. But he basically goes on to say that Barrack was speaking on stage at the Milken Institute MENA, MENA Summit in Abu Dhabi on Tuesday. Milken, is that like Michael Milken by any chance? How ridiculous would that be? Anyway, Barrack was asked by CNN's Becky Anderson about the reputational damage of the Khashoggi killing to Saudi Arabia, and in response, he joked, as long as you don't make me a guest at the Ritz, which Mr. Bonesaw did to the rest of the royal family that opposed him. Barrack went on to launch a lengthy defense of Saudi Arabia, accusing Western countries of failing to understand the kingdom. And he's not entirely wrong there. I do think there are many ways in which we fail to understand what they're doing over there in Saudi-owned Arabia. The atrocities in any autocratic country are dictated by the rule of law, he continued. So for us to dictate what we think is the moral code there, when we have a young man and regime that is trying to push themselves into 2030, I think is a mistake. Of course, I guess that just means that Tom Barrack is pro-Sharia law, and so is the rest of the Trump campaign, and they ought to let the Tea Party crazies here in the United States know that. But gee whiz, just as we learned from Greg in the beginning of the show, even the offense of being pro-Sharia law will be overlooked by the Republican base. That's not just sexual misconduct and blackface that they're willing to excuse. Being pro-Sharia law, I guess, is another one up there, too. Okay, there's more to that report. You should read through it, but now it's time to turn things over to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and let me see if I can grab you the summary of what we can expect today. We can get to a couple more stories. Starting off, he's got the Green New Deal. Co-author Jared Huffman was given only a minute to dog walk devil spawn Liz Cheney over her Green New Deal lies, but he did it. The FBI announced a massive white supremacist gang bust, but Trump doesn't care. I'm sure he thinks they're very fine people.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More to come still. House Intel Chair Adam Schiff schooled Devin Nunes on why the committee's Russia probe never terminated, despite Nunes' efforts to quash it. And Chuck Schumer's plan to finally take down Mitch McConnell will be done backwards and in heels. There is more. You know I can't fit it all in there. That's why you got to stay tuned for Justice Program.